Hello, this is Ralph K. Ginorio. Welcome to the 20th installment in my video adaptation of my lessons on the history behind the terror atrocities of 9/11/2000. We have brought the story of Hitler's war against the Jews through theory and through the beginning of and opening phases of World War II, where there were tensions between Hitler and his political soldiers of the SS and the Gestapo on the one hand, and the traditional German army and German society on the other hand, that was willing to be supine and pliable in Hitler's hands, but when their noses were rubbed in certain unpleasantnesses, like the pogrom of Kristallnacht in 1938, there tended to be a natural resistance to Hitler and his political soldiers. In 1941, Hitler was the master of mainland Europe. At the beginning of 1941, his only remaining enemy was England, or the British Empire. And while there was fighting in North Africa between Germany's Italian allies, supported by the Afrika Korps, and the British in Egypt, for the most part, Britain was in an extraordinarily weak position. It could hold out and survive because it maintained control of the airspace over the English Channel. But except in Africa, every time the British got too close to Germany's European heartland, they got crushed. So Hitler was supplied by his communist ally in Joe Stalin in Russia. What started World War II, what made World War II possible, was that the two great evil totalitarian police states of modern history, National Socialist Germany on the one hand, and Communist Russia on the other hand, made common cause against all the various societies between them in Eastern Europe that were set up by Woodrow Wilson and the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. It was the partnership between Nazi Germany and Communist Russia that started World War II. And the deal that Stalin, the dictator of Russia, made with Hitler, the dictator of Germany, was that Russia would supply Germany with as many raw materials as it needed for its war with Britain. Stalin calculated that Hitler would never be stupid enough to start a second front in the war. While Britain was still around, Stalin felt reasonably safe. But he did not know who he was dealing with. Hitler never saw himself like Stalin did. Stalin saw Stalin as a workman, as a harder worker and a deeper political schemer than anyone around him. But Stalin worked hard and he considered himself a practical man. Hitler considered himself to be a political artist. He acted like an artist. He had moods like an artist. He had Berchtesgaden, a retreat fit for an artist, built by the Nazi elite for him as a gift. He considered himself to be a misunderstood artist for most of his life, and his art was reshaping the human species and cutting out all the cancerous evil people like the Jews from his point of view. And he had an inspiration. He was not going to wait for the conventional moment when Britain was defeated in order to go after what he really wanted. He was getting older. His health wasn't what it used to be. And he wanted to be there. He wanted to be there when he instituted the extermination of the Untermenschen Jews. So, rather than wait for Britain, Hitler in the spring of 1941 prepares for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion and conquest of the Soviet Union. Now, this is delayed by a critical 6 weeks because of actions by the British in Crete and by the Yugoslav government to stand up against Hitler, and a subsequent invasion by German and Italian forces, Axis forces, south through the Balkans, ultimately through Greece, ultimately kicking the British out of Crete. A terrible defeat for the British. But this bought time. Had Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of Russia, happened on schedule, well, the history of the world may have been a very horrible and different thing. As Hitler is preparing his army to invade Russia, he makes it clear personally to his senior generals, and the political officers make it very clear to their counterparts in the regular German military. In Russia, we are not fighting by the same Marquis of Queensberry rules that you, professional soldiers, have heretofore used. We are going into Russia not in a typical war of nation states. We are engaged, the Nazis said, in a war of civilizations. We are going to prune and purify the human race and cut out the cancers. And unlike Poland and unlike France, you regular soldiers are not going to be allowed to have scruples and stand against us. If you can't be a part of this, you let us know now. We'll put you on a list, and we'll keep you out of anything consequential. And there's an implied threat, of course, because in a police state, when you get yourself on a list of people who weren't necessarily hoorah for the government, you could expect some payback coming your way from the Gestapo. So the German army was told in no uncertain terms, we are going to do stuff in Russia that you've never seen before, and you are to get the hell out of our way. When the German forces invaded Russia in June of 1941, right behind the troops came the Einsatzkommandos. The Einsatzkommandos are Death's Head commandos. They were organized into Einsatzgruppen, death squads. These were SS. They were Hitler's truest believers, and they had a political war to fight. Now, the initial invasion of Russia was remarkably successful, in part because Stalin had been punishing anyone who was saying boo about what the Germans might do. He had been so unwilling to listen to the possibility that Hitler was going to betray him that when Hitler's invasion became evident and undeniable, Stalin hid in his bedroom for a few days, and had there been anyone in the senior leadership of the Communist Party in 1941 still with any backbone, he would have been deposed. But he had purged all of that out of the senior leadership. They were terrified and servile. And so Stalin's bad moment passed. But throughout the course of the rest of 1941, the Germans pushed deeper and deeper into Russia. They captured or killed armies of millions of Russians. They took ridiculous amounts of supplies. And as the first snows were beginning to fall, German troops were in Vyazma, less than 20 miles from the Kremlin in Moscow. The German army could see the onion domes of the Kremlin from their forward observation posts. Had the Germans not gone into the Balkans, it is incredibly likely that Moscow would have been taken, and unlike in Napoleon's time, Moscow was a significant military target. It was the center of the rail network that Russia depended upon to fight the war. If Hitler had taken Moscow, it would have been a very, very different war from that point on. But he didn't. In any event, though, still Hitler is deep inside Russia. Now, at first, many Russians rose up and supported Hitler. They hated the communists. Many Russians had lost, in fact, every Russian had been brutalized in one way or another by the communists. There was even an army of pro-Nazi Russians led by General Vlasov. But in general terms, Hitler's political soldiers screwed that up. Potentially, the Russian people could have been used as allies against the communists. But Hitler's political soldiers treated everyday Russians like slaves, and made it very clear that there was nothing for the average Russian in a Nazi victory. Had he been more pragmatic, he would have enlisted the aid of as many Russians as possible, but Hitler wasn't. Hitler and his people were out for blood. They were out to impose their view on the world, and they had the military force to do it. But what the political soldiers did to the Russians pales to insignificance compared to what they did to the Jews. Following the soldiers, the Einsatzgruppen would go to every shtetl, every village, every city neighborhood, and gather the Jews. The standard procedure in a shtetl would be to have the Jews all line up and dig a trench And when the trench was dug, the Einsatzgruppen would shoot them so that their bodies would fall into the trench, except for a handful of Jews that were left to cover the bodies with lye, so that the bodies would melt by the powdered acid that is lye, and then cover over the bodies, and then they'd be shot and buried too, and on to the next village. The greatest of these Einsatzgruppen actions was at Baba Yar. One of the most ancient ghettos in Eastern Europe was emptied by the Nazis, and the people were marched out into the countryside. They were stripped, they were segregated, men, women, and children, and they were forced to walk and then run along a forest path winding through the woods, surrounded by SS men, Einsatzkommandos, with Schmeissers, with MP40 submachine guns. And as they rounded a corner, they were going on a path along the side of a quarry where German machine guns were lined up, and they mowed down everyone. This massacre went on for 3 days. For 3 days and 2 nights, the civil population of a major Russian city, the ghetto part of that city, was shot in this manner. The Einsatzkommandos were Hitler's best and brightest. But shooting people in wartime takes bullets away from combat soldiers, and it's inefficient. You need one guy with a rifle to shoot one person one at a time, or one guy with a machine gun to shoot a few dozen. Bullets cost money, as the Chinese Communist government can tell you, because everyone they execute, they bill their family for the bullet. There has to be a more efficient way. But more than that, the Einsatzkommandos, when they began going on leave, began swallowing their own pistols. You can only lie to yourself so much about what you do. You can call yourself a hero, a political soldier, but when your job, week in, week out for months, is to stare down the iron sights of your weapon, squeeze the trigger, and shoot a grandma, and shoot her baby, granddaughter, you can only lie to yourself so much. Hitler's truest believers began killing themselves in massive numbers. So Hitler needed a new solution, because the Einsatzkommandos weren't working, and they were ultimately going to commit suicide. The story of this next solution, this final solution, is next.